Welcome back everyone to another Unreal Engine 4 tutorial, and in today's video we shall be able to walk up to our NPC, sell him some items. So let's sell some equipment, then let's walk up to it with another dude and let's try to buy something. So this guy right here does not have plenty enough of money to buy the vest because the vest is quite expensive, but we can buy any other items that we have plenty of money for. And this guy right here can sell and buy everything since he has plenty of cash. So let's begin with first creating an interface which is going to allow us to interact with our AI. So let's call this AI interaction, and inside of here we need a couple of functions. First one, start interaction, which is gonna allow us to introduce ourselves to our AI, and this needs an input player, and I'm gonna use my third-person character reference. Then we need another function, so add new function, and let's call this buy item, and this is going to allow us to buy an item from an AI. And here we need an index, which is an integer, and then another function which is going to be the sell item. And for this one I'm going to use let's use the item itself, so item as slots. Here we go. So that's it for our interface. Now let's create the actual AI. So character blueprint class. Let's call this AI shop. And let's give this a cube so we can actually see this guy. Now let's go to the event graph, add a new variable, and let's call this inventory. And this is going to be our slots ri. And we need to make sure that this is a replicated variable so that everybody could know what's inside of it. Now let's add the interface. So let's go to the class settings and add our AI interaction interface. Let's compile this, and now we should have the event sell item and the event buy item and also the event start interaction. Now let's work on these two for now because those are the only ones we are able to access right now. So let's get our inventory, and also let's make this instance editable, and let's for now simply add this entry right here. And for the buy, let's remove the index like so, and for now this is going to be good enough. We are going to upgrade this. Now let's change up our widgets system a little bit so that we can actually spawn some widgets. So what I want to do is keyboard E key event. We simply want to copy this part, and let's call this create widget. Let's paste this in, and let's promote this to an input, the class, so that we can provide the class from the outside of this function. And now let's create another one, and let's call this remove widget. And again, let's go to the event graph and let's copy this part right here, paste it in, and also make sure to copy in these two nodes as well. Now back in our event graph, we can remove all of this, and in our create widget function, let's do an if branch check, because we want to check if, let's get our UI and let's see, is this visible, and let's get is valid. So is valid. We want to check if both of these are true. If these are not true, then we can create our widget, but if this is true, then we want to run our remove widgets function so that on the second click the screen would be removed. Now in our event graph, on the restart inventory widget, on the first one we can run our create inventory widget. So let's call this inventory. And actually we want to do this on then 1, and on then 0 we want to remove our widget so that it would be like a full reset. And for our E key event, we simply want to create our inventory widget. Now for our shop, we need the actual widgets. So let's go to the widgets UI folder, and inside of here I'm simply going to copy my UI inventory, and I'm going to rename this to be UI shop, because this widget right here already contains my equipment and my inventory. I'm just gonna simply add another window in the middle. So what I will do is simply move this inventory to be over here, and then I want to delete the widget switcher and right click the canvas panel and replace it with a child. So now this gives us this screen right here. Now for the Dropbox panel, I want to give this a tint over here, since it's not going to have any tint from the actual Dropbox. We are not going to have it over here. And also I want to remove these buttons right here to have only my equipment and inventory. Now in the graph you can see it gave us quite a few errors. We're going to fix those in a second, but first let's create another border for our shop. So let me align this. Let's remove the background on this one and let's rename this to be our shop panel, and let's make this into a variable. Now let's go to the graph and so we no longer need these widget switcher keys, and we also don't need to display our craftable items. Let's also remove our Dropbox from this line right here. Let's drag this in closer and make sure to reconnect this is false. And now the errors should be gone. There is one last thing we need to add, but first we need to create it. So let's create another widget. Let's call this UI shop panel. And inside of here, just like in the previous ones, let's add a border. Let's make sure that that is a parent. And what I'm simply going to do is from the inventory panel, I'm going to copy this vertical box with the text scroll box and the grid panel. So I'm going to paste it over here. So now we have all the styling with us. We have our grid panel. Let's make sure it is a variable. And now we can go to our graph. And over here we want to cast to our AI shop. And we need a variable for this. So let's create a variable. Let's call this NPC. Let's make this into an actor type. Actor, instance editable, exposed on spawn. Now let's connect it right here, and as our AI shop we want to get its inventory and we want to loop through the whole thing, but I'm gonna make my life easier. I'm just simply gonna copy these nodes right here to from my inventory panel to my shop panel. Connect the RI, so we are looping through the inventory of our AI and creating the item data widget for every single one of our items. Here we do the math for the columns and rows, and let's make sure we promote our slots per row to a variable and give this a value. Now for our item data we need to provide it a type, so let's open up our UI item data and let's create a new variable and let's call this source, and this needs to be a string, instance editable and exposed on spawn. Now in our on drag detected we can connect this to be our tag. Now let's make sure that we fix the issues in the shop panel. We have a source, and for this one let's type in shop, and for the inventory panel event graph the source is our inventory. Let's go back to our UI shop, and at the end let's copy these last nodes and let's create a new widget, and this is our UI shop panel, and we want to add a child to our shop panel. Now for the NPC we actually don't have a variable for this yet, so in our third person character let's create a new variable and let's call this interactable, and let's make this also into an actor. Let's make sure this is replicated. And now back in our UI shop as the third person character we can get our interactable, connect this to the NPC. Now let's go back to our AI shop, and on start interaction as the player we want to create the widget function and we want to create our UI shop widget. Now let's give our AI a tag, so let's select self, look for a tag and give this an NPC tag. Then in our third person character we can actually start interacting with it. So on keyboard key E I have this line trace. Let's check if this actor has a tag, and so the tag needs to be our NPC, and from this false we can run our check if we have NPC, and on true we can run the start interaction message. And for the target, let's use our hit actor, and for the player, let's use self. Now we want to set up a few more things in our third person character. So here I'm gonna add a custom event, and let's call this server sell items, and also let's get another custom event, and this is gonna be the server buy items. Now we need the sell items message. Let's connect the item to get the type and the target. Let's make sure that this is ran on server, and same goes for this one. We need the buy item message, connect the target, connect the index, and make sure this is ran on server. Now let's slightly modify our move item function, and over here let's add a new pin to our local direction. This is a shop. And let's do the same thing for the other switch, shop. Now from the first switch, from the shop, let's go directly to the second switch, and if the second one is also a shop, then we simply want to return true. Now at the end here, what we want to do is check if any of these is OR. So let's add all of the three of these together. So let's see if we have removed an item from any of our locations. Then we want to do an AND boolean check, and we want to check if our local direction is equal to the shop. So shop, connect the AND, and then we can do a if branch check, hold control, reconnect this like so, and if this is true, we want to get our local item, split it, break this, and we want to get the data table row. Let's connect this to true. Now we need the S inventory structure type. There we go. Now let's paste it in here, and at this point I would add the money. So let's create a new variable. Let's call this money. This is going to be an integer, and of course this is going to hold our money, and we need a value for our items. So in our items as inventory structure, we need a new entry, and let's call this value. In our items database, we can set up some values. So 20 for this, 20 for this. There we go. Which now means that in our third person character we have this value which we can multiply. So the value times the amount of the items that we have here. Now let's set our money variable. Then we want to get the money variable and do plus money plus the value times the amount. And at the end of this all, we want to run our server sell items. The target is our interactable, and the item is the local item. Then we can return true, and we're good with this function. Now we need one more widget to confirm our buy and sell. So let's create a new widget. Let's call this UI confirm buy. And instead of here, to make my life easier again, I'm gonna copy from the inventory. I'm gonna copy these buttons right here, and that's all that I need just for the styling. 2 buttons. So let's paste these in. Let's align these to where we want them to be. So change up the styling a little bit. So I have 2 buttons, yes button and a no button. And this widget does uses the canvas panel. And let's go to the graph. And here we need quite a few variables. So let's start creating them. The first one is going to be the player. We want to know which player this is. So the third person character reference, instance editable and exposed on spawn. So that all of them would be instance editable and exposed on spawn. I'm going to duplicate this, and let's call this index, which is an integer. Then we want to have the direction, which is a string, and we want to have also a source. Then we want to have the item itself, so the S slot structure, and the last one would be the slot index. So we have an item index and a slot index. And now on yes button clicked, we can get our item, split it, split the row handle, and let's get data table row, connect the execution and row name. Then depending on the source, we can do a switch on string. We need 4 inputs, so we have our player, inventory, equipment, and a shop. Let's work on the shop first. On the shop, we want to do a if branch check because we want to check. So let's get our player and get the money. We want to check if we have more or the same amount that is required to buy our items. To get the value, we need to copy our inventory structure. Let's paste this in over here, and let's multiply the value times the amount of the items. So right here. And then as our player, we want to add an item. So add item. Let's use our local item, and for the source, let's see, let's connect the default one as well, so we don't have to provide a source right now. So that's for the later projects. Then we can do an if branch check. If we were able to add an item, and if we were, then as our character, we want to set the money variable to be the amount that is the money minus the value times the amount. As our player, we can run our server buy items since we are buying, and then for the target we want to get the interactable. So get that, connect to the target, and for the index, let's use our item index. Now from over here we can run our remove from parent. Remove from parent. Then we want to do a delay, tiny one, to confirm the buy, and then we want to refresh our widget. So in my third person character, let's add a new custom event, and let's call this refresh shop widget. And just like over here, let's copy these nodes right here like so. And now instead of creating the UI inventory, let's create the UI shop. And now in our confirm buy, we can, as our character, we can run our refresh shop widget. Now for the other parts of the switch, we simply, as our third person character, want to move the item function, and we want to do this on all of these execution pins. Now let's make sure to connect our item, our source, direction, item index, and the slot index. And then at the end we can proceed with our remove from parent. And let's make sure to set these falses as well, and the default here as well, and also the row not found. Now on no button click, what we simply want to do is bring this up right here, remove from parent, and refresh the widget. So the video is at 19 mark already, so we should probably finish this off. Let's go to the shop panel now, and let's add in the graph, let's add new override function, and let's create ourselves on drop event. And for this one, from the operator, we want to gas to our drag and drop item operation. We want to get our item, we want to get our tag, and we want to get our index on this one. Then let's see, we want to cast to our character, then use the get owning player pawn as a reference. So now, since this is the shop panel, we want to create a widget Simply create the widget, do not run the function that's in the character, just create a widget, and the widget is our confirm by. So now this gives us a lot of inputs. So player, item index, direction would be the source. No, direction is the shop. The source is where the item is coming from. Let's connect the item itself, and slot index is going to be left at 0. Then we can add to the viewport and then connect our return values and make sure it's set to true so that we notify that we have handled our drag and drop operation. Now let's go to our inventory panel and let's fix the on drop event, because as of right now we are only moving the item, but we don't want to move the item. Actually, what we want to do is run a switch on string depending on the tag, so depending on the source where the item is coming from. And we want 4 pins again, so we want the player, we want the equipment, we want the inventory, and we want the shop. There we go. Now we want to connect our player, our equipment, and inventory to our move item node, then refresh the inventory widget. But from the shop we want to create our confirm widget. So from the shop we're doing that. Then again, connect the player, connect the item, connect the source to the tag, index to item, index direction is the shop, and then we can add to the viewport and return true on the return node. Make sure to perhaps default as well, goes directly to return. And now one more thing left for us to do is in our AI shop on start interaction as our player, we want to set our interactable to be a reference to self. So basically this specific AI right here. Now if we would test this out, drag items to the shop, press yes, the items are getting sold. Now let's try this from another client, and only as of right now it only works with a backpack. So make sure to drag items from the backpack, and there we go, we are buying, we are selling. Now one issue that I noticed was if we pick up a backpack and press I and move the slots around in here, the widgets are getting destroyed. Going to the third person character, and here we have our refresh inventory function, which is exactly the same as we have for the shop, but for some reason it's not doing what I want it to do. So what we can do is first run our remove widget, then let's do a super tiny delay. Let's do like 0.01, and then on completed let's recreate our widget. So now this seems to work just fine the way it should. Now there might be an error that you are receiving about the widgets in our create widget function. The issue is that by default the widget is not valid because we have not spawned any widgets yet. So what we should do is probably let's create a HUD UI, since we are gonna have a UI that's gonna be active at any point in time in the game, and let's add just a simple text field for our money for now. And what I'm gonna do is simply create a binding for the content of the text field, and on here we shall we ain't doing anything in this one, so cast to our character. Let's get the owning player pawn, and from here we can get our money variable and connect it to the return value. And now on begin play in our third person character we can spawn this. So let's create a widget, user interface, and so we need our UI HUD. Let's add to viewport, and let's set this to be our UI variable like so. Now in our create widget we no longer need this is valid. We can simply check whether if it's visible or not, since by default it's gonna be valid since we have already created one. Now we can see on every character how much money we have, so let's try to sell some items. So my vests are the most expensive ones. There we go, you can see we have 444. So that's going to be it for today's video. Tomorrow we're going to work on this a little more to have more functionality for our shop. So thank you guys for watching, and I see you tomorrow.